You're listening to Ukrainapodden, a podcast from Nettavisen. My name is Tormod Malvinsæter, and I'm the host for today. With me in the studio, I have my podcast companion,
Jonsson Henriksen, Ukraine columnist and leader of the Norwegian-Ukrainian Friendship Association.
And it's a big pleasure to welcome back Francis Farrell, journalist or reporter in the Kyiv Independent, back in Oslo.
Yeah, it's good to be here. It's good to be back in Oslo. I was just commenting that this podcast room was the first thing I saw of Oslo, and now I'm seeing a little bit more. I was in Parliament today, and so finally seeing a little bit of Norway, but it's good to be back here.
Maybe we should just start briefly. What took you to Norway this time?
I was having a discussion at an event in honor of actually the Russian journalist Anna Politkovskaya, who was murdered back in the 2000s and it was an event held by the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, which is very switched on not only to human rights issues in Russia, but also the importance of press freedom, supporting journalism, civil society in Ukraine as well. So talking about all those things about safety in Ukraine as a journalist, whether it's the biggest threat is FPV or SBU or something in between. But yeah, it was a good discussion.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, SBU is the security service of Ukraine, which has had some troubling, there's been some troubling episodes between the SBU and journalists in Ukraine the last couple of years.
Yeah. As I mentioned, the way I said it in the conference as well, Ukraine is still a democracy and it still functions as a democracy, and it's very far away from becoming a dictatorship. You can still criticize the regime, the Kyiv regime. You can criticize the leadership. You can investigate corruption. You can do all these things, but the wartime government also has these politically loyal security services who do sometimes see the work of independent journalists as a bit of a nuisance, and who sometimes want to look into it or create problems for it, but nothing compared to a place where you actually get locked up or worse for what you say.
Yeah, and nothing like the journalist we just honored with the Helsinki Committee that was shot several times. Those times are past. Yeah. Luckily. Your specialty in the Kyiv Independent is the frontline reporting. You spend quite a lot of time, I think more than, I'm not sure if there's any other journalist that spends at least much more time than you in the front lines.
Well, maybe some Ukrainian ones and some photographers, because they're always adventuring out there. But maybe in terms of English language, I think media, especially the big foreign media, are not going to the front lines much at all anymore. And we try and go once every month or two.
Yeah. And your last trip, you wrote also a piece about the infantry situation in Ukraine, and that's a topic we have touched upon here in the podcast earlier. But Ukraine has quite a big lack of infantry soldiers. But how is the infantry situation in Ukraine nowadays?
Yeah, so I think it's important to talk about this at first, because infantry is not somewhere where journalists go and visit anymore at all. It used to be possible until about a year ago. Summer 2024 was the last time we went to infantry, and now it's completely impossible. Now, I've been told you can go to infantry, but it will be a one-way trip most likely. We're talking about because of the drone threat, hiking 15 kilometers to positions along a tree line which is constantly surveilled by drones. So that journey can take several days. There's the threat of distance mining along with artillery and everything. And once you're there, then you're there for several months, because there's a crisis of manpower, but even more importantly, because of the drone threat making the journey so difficult and deadly back and forth, they instead just stay there and stay there and stay there. And they are basically sitting in a hole. Sometimes it's a nice position, sometimes it's a basement, sometimes it's just a hole. a small dugout and a small trench, and they're doing that for months at a time. Often that is more and more common. I remember last year you heard an amazing story about the soldier that was on the position for 60 days, and now I was speaking to guys who came out after 150 days. And so it was in August, and these were guys who, it was still snowy and cold in March when they went out there, and they were on position through all of spring, basically all of summer as well. So that's the new reality we're dealing with. And that's happening at the same time as Ukraine's overall so-called manpower crisis. It's something we've talked about before, that being the biggest issue for Ukraine is at the moment it's not ammunition, it's manpower. But it's important to actually understand what is behind the simple phrase manpower crisis. First and foremost, it is the infantry, because it is the infantry who, on one hand, you need the most of, but on the other hand, they take the most casualties, the heaviest losses, and they, especially at this point in the war, where, I heard a press officer say at one point, not only is it more dangerous, but there's nothing romantic about it anymore at all. It used to be trenches, firefights, artillery, and now it's just sitting in a hole for months while the drones are trying to kill you. So no one wants to be in infantry, and so anymore. And so in an environment where the incoming Ukrainian soldiers are mostly mobilized, and the incoming infantry soldiers are basically all mobilized, it's important to make the distinction between, when we're talking about manpower crisis, the infantry versus everything else. Drone units are still using a mix of mobilized and volunteers. If someone does want to volunteer now, they'll go to a drone unit most likely. But the big problem is in the infantry. And now we've reached a point where even the best brigades, even the famous brigades like 3rd Assault Brigade, Azov Brigade, Khartia, who have spent huge amounts of money on recruiting, and who used to have a policy of volunteers only. Maybe some they still do, but even those are under strength, very, very badly under strength in infantry. And what that means is the front line kind of becoming more thin, more holes between infantry positions. It depends on the sector and the brigade, but sometimes, you hear about maybe in one sector, the average is like 10 guys defending a whole kilometer of front line. That's like maybe 5 positions with two or three people on them each, or maybe only 6 people, or maybe no one, and the whole that part of the front line is just defended by drones and artillery further back. But at the same time, again, it's important to understand the infantry crisis as it's almost like a mathematical equation. Because there are so many factors that lead to the final result, which is how many combat effective infantrymen you actually have defending the front line. So that's the end kind of product of the equation, but the beginning is the input, and lots of people focus on that. They think, okay, well, we solve the manpower crisis, we need to do more mobilization. We need to mobilize the young men. We need to just be more draconian with it because it's an existential war, and so on and so on. That kind of makes sense, but that's just one part. So that's your incoming input of manpower. But then there are so many factors along the road which affect
attainment.
Yeah, which affect, are they going to hang around? How well are they going to fight? How well are you using the resources that you have? That will stop, that will make you need to recruit, mobilize even more or less in the future. And so once you have the input, then you have the training. And that's important. It's also important what kind of people you're bringing in. Are they motivated? Are they old, young, physically fit? Then you have the training and the equipment that they're given. But then a very important part is like the decisions that you make with this new inflow of manpower. Are you sending them to, for example, to refill and reinforce the ranks of existing brigades, or are you creating new brigades from scratch? And that we know that's been a big problem, especially in 2024. The constant creation of new brigades with lower motivation and with a lot of like officers, brought back from retirement and kind of really just bad culture, which ends up leading to poorer combat effectiveness and more losses.
Yeah, and some people frame that as something really good, that Ukraine was having the resources and soldiers to create new brigades. And we had some, how to say, the most optimistic, unrealistic, optimistic people on social media was saying that now Ukraine is gonna take back Crimea because look at all the new brigades they're creating. But you're saying that it was not, how to say, a signal of strength.
Well, I mean, it's a difficult decision because sometimes it does make sense maybe to you're expanding the military. You also expand the number of brigades, and that makes it easier to rotate. Because you need some brigades in reserve. But that works in theory, but then it's a question of how you use them. And there are some big examples like the counteroffensive in 2023, using completely new brigades for the most difficult mission of the war, potentially, or the story of the 155th Brigade, the one that was meant to be the star example of the new project for European countries to equip and train new Ukrainian brigades. And the French did their part of the deal. They equipped them with new weapons, they trained them. But because the crop of mobilized soldiers was so poor and poorly motivated and poorly led by Ukrainian officers, this brigade had this scandal with hundreds of people going AWOL even before they went to France.
Yeah, AWOL is away without leave, like leaving the unit.
Yeah, it's not quite desertion because sometimes people they go AWOL to avoid a bad unit, and then they come back and other units, like better units, can take them in. How
is the training capacity of the Ukrainian armed forces now? Because there's a lot of people saying, as you mentioned, that they should mobilize more. But if they had mobilized more people in a shorter period of time, would they have the capacity to train them properly?
Well, it's always problematic, and there have been improvements here and there to the training, which was famously poor and very Soviet and inadequate, and it's still the case. In terms of numbers and capacity, I'm not really sure, but the bigger issue is known to be the quality. And a lot of brigades, like good brigades, are pushing them to let the brigade do the entire basic training in the area of operations, rather than having 6 weeks in some incredibly just depressing Soviet institutions somewhere in the rear, where there's still a threat of missile strikes, by the way, but where they'll maybe shoot 1 or 2 magazines in 6 weeks, and the training that they'll be getting is from old instructors who themselves are not really motivated and who don't have experience with drone warfare. But again, that's just one little section of this equation of the manpower problem. That's a multiplier. Is this this training period, is that going to improve the overall crop that you've got, or is it going to create reasons for already people leaving, going AWOL before even reaching the front line? And then on top of that, there are other things. There's fortifications. Have you done the work to protect the lives of your soldiers fighting this defensive war, which we know there are lots of issues with as well. And then there is the simple questions of the command decisions, and that's something we also know there's an issue of forcing units to fight until the last man, to hold one kind of pointless village, or fighting within in areas that are almost completely surrounded and not giving the order to withdraw, and that kind of thing. And that also leads to excess losses, which then need to be replaced by more people. And so just the thing I try and focus on. And then, the last multiplier in this whole equation is the final frontline risk environment itself, which has also just been getting deadlier and deadlier. So it doesn't matter if you train them really, really well. Well, it does matter, but still they're being, and you equip them and you put them in good units, they're still entering a battlefield environment where they have to hike for 15 kilometers with drones hunting them on every step of the way once they're out there. So that's the whole equation, all of these little factors, and just focusing on gathering more people from the streets, practically, or from Ukrainian society, and shoving them into this pipeline without doing everything you can to improve their experience and their survivability, and making the best use out of them along the equation is a mistake. And unfortunately, we see with the creation of the new assault forces,
because they created some new assault forces last month or something, like 4 weeks ago, more or less.
Yeah, and it's a big topic in itself because it's confusing.
Because again, it sounds great that Ukraine has the capacity to create new assault forces,
exactly.
like even more attacking capacity.
Exactly. So we're not talking here about the existing air assault forces, the paratrooper corps, and we're also not talking about the famous brigades like the 3rd Assault, the 5th Assault, or the 92nd Assault Brigades. We're actually talking about, they're not completely new, but they're newly expanded assault regiments. I think there's about 5 or 6 of them that used to be separate battalions, now they're regiments. And they are all led by commanders who are known to be in very good relations with Commander-in-Chief Syrsky. And they are good at assaulting. Like they're good, they're effective units at what they do. They're good at counterattacks. They're good at they practice specifically for assault operations, and they're very well equipped with their own native drone units and drone support. They usually have some artillery as well, some tanks, Bradleys, that kind of thing. But the problem is a question of allocation of resources, because you can be good at an assault, but in this current battlefield environment, attacking, coming out in the open with big numbers, trying to take back a village or something like that, is still going to lead to much higher casualties, much higher losses. And there's only a limited kind of human resource. And so on one hand, strategically, it makes sense for Ukraine to have some kind of rapid response force which can respond to things like happened in Dobropilya, where this breakthrough happened, and to clear that before the Russians dig in. But unfortunately, I've heard this from many commanders across the front line that, these assault regiments are getting so many mobilized men. And I've seen, pictures of their training ground. It's like hundreds and hundreds of guys training at once, where entire brigades are maybe just getting a dozen new infantry per month to refill their ranks. So it's about how you use, using the smartest ways of using the people that you've got, rather than just bringing more and more people in.
Do you think Syrsky and the rest of the military leadership agrees with your analysis of the problem, or because it sounds like they're doing kind of the opposite of what you would recommend? Yeah.
So I think we're at a disagreement with Syrsky here, and maybe it sounds kind of rash for me to criticize the military leadership, but this is not something isolated in that I just came up with myself. Some of This is a well-known problem, a problem of the mentality of the leadership, which is often kind of detached from the reality on the front line in many ways, and consistently making decisions, unfortunately, that are not in line with the basic understanding that Ukraine is fighting a defensive, attritional war where, in the short term, you might take back a village that is already destroyed.
But in the long term, you might lose Kupyansk or Pokrovsk or...
Yeah, but in the long term, fighting in a way that consistently leads to excess losses of your own will eventually come with worse consequences later, including for territory, because your military just becomes more and more overstretched. And in a time when it truly seems like entire brigades are running out of infantry, to funnel so many into these assault forces just so you can counterattack any way you want, quickly and effectively, but still end up taking more losses. A lot of people agree that this is quite problematic. I guess the counter argument here could be that this is the way the war is going anyway. We need to somehow move into a place where we can almost practically fight without infantry, because on the very front line, because sitting in those positions is so deadly for months and months. It would be the same problem if we just fed more infantry into the brigades. Then they would also, and so it's better to have kind of an empty front line defended by native drone units, and then be able to kind of have this rapid response. Than it is to feed the infantry into these front lines anyway, and have the same results. That kind of makes sense on paper, but the scale at which these assault regiments are just assaulting everywhere they can, even sometimes like in Pokrovsk, in the depth of the Pokrovsk pocket, like there's no reason to counterattack there. You're already like mostly surrounded. Better to counterattack on the flanks that are trying to surround you. And unfortunately, it just aligns with the understanding of Syrsky, who loves to micromanage, who loves to attack, and that aligns with Zelensky and his kind of appreciation more of the narrative, the short-term, victory, saying we're fighting back, we took this back. And they never admit that they lost a village. They admit that they take them back. But that is what we're dealing with, and it's just in the job of the actual officers involved in brigades, including in these assault regiments, to in their little zones of responsibility to do their best to preserve the lives of their guys.
Yeah, I think was it approximately 1 year ago since Volodar fell? Is it? Yeah. And I think there was a lot of critics back then also, especially from Deep State and other military bloggers, that the unit that was placed there was not allowed to retreat early enough. You had the same thing in Bakhmut, which was a lot of people think they held on to the city way too long, like many months too long. So that's still a problem, that Ukrainian units are not allowed to retreat when it's still, I would say, not safe, but still a good chance to retreat without losing too many.
Yeah, it's a famous problem, and it was there in Bakhmut as well. Bakhmut ended up finishing in a strange way, because the flanks did actually hold, and the Wagner units just eventually pushed through the city, and it came at a high cost. And then Wagner, turned around and did its thing. But it was very noticeable in Avdiivka as well. And then, as you mentioned, Vuhledar, and then a few months after Vuhledar, we had Velika Novosilka, we had Korakhova, and unfortunately, it kind of keeps happening. But what is making this problem, I think, even more dangerous is once again the advances in drone warfare and the increasing saturation of the sky with Russian drones. Because if you look at the map of the pocket of Bakhmut, for example, it looked really bad. Like it looked like, they were almost surrounded. They were so close to that main logistical road.
It was one road of life, or which was more like a road of death.
Yes, and they could control that road with artillery, with mortars. They were so close, and even with anti-tank systems. But they still didn't have FPV drones back then, and if they did, there was no way they could. I mean, holding that was just not possible. And so what we see now around Pokrovsk is a pocket that doesn't look so bad on the map. Like it's a big pocket, and there's still a fair distance between these two pincers. But we're dealing with a much higher. We're dealing with now a war of FPV drones. We're dealing with fiber optic drones that can ignore electronic warfare and jamming, and they often place them on the side of the road to ambush. And so what doesn't look as bad on the map, and maybe doesn't look as bad in general staff, is actually really deadly in reality. So I mean,
because a smaller pocket like in Bakhmut would already in reality have been closed because of the drones.
Exactly.
And that's so.
And we had an example of one of these larger pockets being closed or emptied in a very deadly and chaotic way for Ukraine, and that was Kursk actually, which was back in March, because it was a much bigger pocket, but the logistics was so much more limited because it was crossing the state border, and that was where the Russians first really started using these elite drone units with fiber optic.
Was that the first time we saw Rubicon for real?
Yeah.
Because we mentioned Rubicon before here, but that's like a elite drone unit from Russia.
Yeah, and that's where their work, and especially their work with fiber optic, that really was born in Kursk, and now has expanded. They're not covering the whole front line, but they have Rubicon units present and active in the hottest parts.
Yeah, and they're still kind of expanding Rubicon as I understand it. Yeah. But I think for most of the full-scale war, Ukraine has had an advantage on the drone side. But now I hear more and more talk about that Russia is catching up, and some even argue that Russia might have an advantage now. How do you see that situation?
Well, overall, I think the most important kind of aspects, the bread and butter of drone warfare, are two things: the kind of Mavics or DJI Mavics or other similar drones, which are just the most important part, because they do both the constant reconnaissance of the front line, and they also do the bomb drops, which is not as sexy as FPV drones, but it's actually, in many sectors, that is taking actually more casualties of the enemy than FPV drones, because it's very economical. You fly above the enemy, they're moving around, you drop bombs straight on them or their shelters. And then there's FPVs as well, which is hitting either the frontline areas or flying further back, hitting logistics, hitting antennas, vehicles, armored vehicles, whatever. And in those two areas, I would say mostly there is something akin to parity between the two sides. But it's not that simple, because then there is electronic warfare, and that's one side is maybe stronger than the other in one area, other side is stronger, but Russia is still far ahead with fiber optic, which is the kind of cheat code for this whole war of frequencies, war of radio waves. Fiber optic is the cheat code because it doesn't care about any of this stuff. And very, very early, the Russians settled on one, I think, main model of fiber optic drone that just works and that was mass-produced very quickly, while Ukraine, which has this huge ecosystem of different FPV producers and government contracts and volunteers, just simply failed to do that. Sourcing the fiber optic itself was also a challenge. And brigades, and this is still the case, brigades are all basically left, if they want fiber optic, they need to figure it out themselves. And they're still way ahead in that, and that's really felt on the front line. There are other drones as well, of course. There's the fixed-wing ISR drones, which are flying into each side's rear and finding bigger targets. And Russia used to have the advantage with those, but then Ukraine got very good at shooting them down with their own FPVs, intercepting them. And so Ukraine actually had the advantage there for a long time, but just in the last few months, Russia has finally caught on and is starting to also intercept the Ukrainian ISR drones and making it a lot more difficult for them to work. And the problem there is that Russia is able to produce a lot more, and so they can play this numbers game of, okay, they'll intercept a certain percent, but we keep sending them out, and Ukraine cannot afford to do that. The one area where Ukraine is still way ahead is the heavy bomber drones, which are used not only for actual heavy bombing, but also for frontline logistics, for distance mining, for all kinds of useful things.
Yeah, for example, the guy you met in Konstantinivka, was it? I guess he got a lot of his supplies from drones.
Yeah.
Flying in, like they flew in ammunition, water, food, whatever we needed.
Yeah, I mean, I should mention, like, that's the only way that that these people can stay on positions for months and months is having their supplies brought in by drones. The Russians do the same thing, but they don't have the heavy bombers, so they just use like little packs with one FPV or Mavic after another. There's also UGVs, the ground vehicles, which are increasingly becoming important as a way to reach that frontline area. You know, bring equipment in, heavier supplies in that can't be flown in, and sometimes even taking casualties out. But you know, and doing that without risking a whole car and a whole human being. But that also comes with its own challenges. Like, imagine how nerve-wracking it is to put a wounded soldier on a robot vehicle and say, "Okay, good luck," as it moves away at 15 kilometers per hour. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's horrific to even think about. But if we go to the front lines, when you were in both Kupyansk and Konstantinivka, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Konstantinivka.
Yeah. I need to practice my pronunciation. But how was, like, if you could go more into the specific areas, like we talked quite a lot about Kupyansk here the last month or so, because the situation seems quite bad for Ukraine. Like, there's street fighting there now, as we understand it. What was your impression from the city?
Yeah, so Kupyansk, I didn't go inside the city. It's incredibly deadly. Like, it's rolling the dice if your car is going to get hit by a drone or not. More than, maybe even worse than it was getting into Pokrovsk in summer when I went. So you're right. It has gotten a lot worse in the last few months. Primarily because the strange thing about Kupyansk is that there is this river going north to south, and most people thought that, you know, Ukraine would lose the other side of the river first, and then there would be a battle for the river, and that would be a good place to hold the line. But the Russians crossed the river further north, actually quite a long time ago, and they held a small bridgehead on the western side of the river. And recently they've had success coming south down that western side and breaking into the city. And this tells us a few things about the nature of the war. Firstly, the fact that they crossed in the first place in a place where they shouldn't have been able to cross is kind of testament to how there's a big spectrum of combat effectiveness in the Ukrainian army. You know, we know famous brigades, and there are always like good brigades and good drone units deployed to the hottest parts of the front line where the battles are very heavy. But unfortunately, there are a lot of weak spots, you know, like territorial defense brigades, which are undermanned and under-equipped. And they're usually, like, you know, sent to lower priority areas, like that should be quiet and should be easier to defend, like this river. And that's where the Russians thought, oh, we can actually cross this river because our opponent on the other side is really not that strong.
And the Russians have been quite good at spotting these places,
Yeah.
knowing where the weaker units are.
It's a consistent pattern all across the front line, and unfortunately, what very often happens is if you make gains by targeting the weaker units, you often outflank and compromise the position of the better units nearby. And that's what happened in Kupyansk, and then they made it through, and there are a few other things. We can see in Kupyansk, again, just like near Dobropilya, the effect of the increasingly porous front line with these holes in it, with not much infantry really defending it, and the Russians getting better and better at infiltration tactics. So instead of moving forward, I mean, we used to hear about small infantry groups being like 6 to 10 people. Now it's 1 or 2, usually 1 or 2 guys creeping forward very slowly, making it between Ukrainian positions and just digging in. Maybe sometimes even looking to ambush Ukrainian drone positions. And that's quite easy to do in the heavily forested area north of Kupyansk. And it's obviously quite easy to do once you're inside an urban environment as well. And on top of that, there was the story of this pipeline going under the river, which they were also using, and which Ukraine took probably a bit too long to realize. And the consequence of all of that is that now, yes, the Russians are in the city, and it's quite chaotic in the sense that it's not really clear where the front line is. There isn't really a front line. There are just some Russians here, some Ukrainians here, and occasionally everything is being watched by both sides by drones, but you need to kind of keep track of it and hit when you can. And there were drone pilots telling me that usually they are meant to work at distance of maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 kilometers, but they were flying FPV drones basically into the next street to try and hit Russians that were getting really, really close to them within the city. And what's also making it very difficult is, once again, the cutting off of logistics. So people, one interesting thing I heard was that the problem with the ambush drones along the road was so bad that they decided to start, and it was a good counter move, they started sending Mavic teams out whose job is not to look at the front line, who's not looking at the Russian rear, but is looking at their own rear along their own roads to spot these ambush drones, and then either people on foot or other Mavics dropping little bombs to destroy them, to clear the road.
I've seen they use nets to put over them so they can't fly.
Yeah.
I could have spoken to you the whole night, but I'm afraid you have another meeting you have to attend. I'm not sure if you have any, Jörn, or you have any final thoughts about, it could be about anything, about about anything Ukraine related.
Well, I think, about the front line, it's going to be interesting because it was a year ago in October and November that the Russians were making the fastest advances, actually far more territory than in summer. Over this summer and autumn so far, it's been a pretty consistent number per month, so there hasn't been that scary trajectory, but these numbers are all unfortunately higher than they were last year. But last year, over winter, the situation did stabilize because it's just a lot harder to attack in the way the Russians were attacking. Infantry out in the cold and much more exposed to drones because of the lack of leaves on the trees. And that was enough to stabilize, and this will probably happen again this winter. I don't think we will see the gains continuing to increase in pace. The problem is, though, that the Russian drone teams, which have also, especially over 2025, fiber optic, Rubicon, all of these things, new conversations, new things that we didn't have last winter, really being used at scale and creating a lot of problems for Ukrainian units, not only infantry, but also hunting drone teams, hunting artillery, all artillery is now basically working out of FPV range at this point, just focusing on concealment. And that kind of winter dynamic will be very interesting to see. I think we're likely going to see a stabilization of the front, a slowing down of assault operations, but also a lot of really problematic attrition for the Ukrainian defenses, which are now basically drone-based, but that's what they're relying on. And if those get attrited too much, then it will be much harder to defend once there are a new wave of assault operations in spring and summer.
Francis Farrell, it was a pleasure having you back on the pod. We're really thankful that you took time sharing your knowledge with us. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay in Oslo.
Yeah, always a pleasure to talk to you guys, and great to be here.
We really hope we can do it again, either in Oslo or Kyiv.
In the Crimean restaurant again, maybe. Or maybe a slightly quieter place.
No, I think the episode was great. If any listeners now think it was too noisy, they should tell us in the comments. But I think the noise there, or the sound quality was good. So,
okay. Well, our office is nearby in case you need it.
But you probably don't have such good food in your office as on the Crimean restaurant. Thank you so much, Francis.
Thanks, guys.